Well, let's start from the very beginning. You mentioned that there was betrayal in your marriage. So, what type of betrayal happened and how did it occur?
Well, I got married at 20 years old and did not know when I got married that he was a pornography addict and um, had a horrific wedding night. Um, he masturbated in front of me on our honeymoon. Then there was marital rape. There was emotional, mental, sexual, financial, spiritual abuse in the marriage. There was physical abuse to our children as well as um, sexual grooming. And by that, I mean, with our oldest daughter, he touched her places to see what her reaction would be. And I believe that was also going on with my other three children as well. And yes, I feel like I need to put this in here, not for sympathy, but because I have five children, but then I only talk about four of them. And that is because one of my children did die. So when you hear me say, yes, I have five children, then I only talk about four. It's like, well, wait a minute. She said five. So where's the fifth one? And that's why. Um, so I heard my husband say things to my oldest daughter, like when you wear that, it makes me want to have sex with you. And he said things to my younger daughter that she was concerned that she wasn't pretty. She's absolutely beautiful, but I'm her mother, so I can think that, right? Um, but she was concerned she wasn't pretty, and so he told her that she was going to grow up to be a beautiful, sexy woman. And, these are things that no father should be thinking about their child, nor should they ever be saying it to their child. But it was what happened in my home. And um, I have a lot of things that I regret, but I also did a lot of things right. And I have made a lot of things right. I lost relationship with my oldest daughter and my oldest son with my oldest daughter, because I was married to her father. As long as I was married to him, she would have nothing to do with me. But as soon as I told her that I was divorcing him, she called me within 5 minutes, and we've been building our relationship ever since. And my oldest son was told that I was the reason the marriage fell apart, and he believed that. And so and when I tried to tell him the truth, he did not want to hear the truth, and he quit talking to me. But I've been rebuilding relationship with him now for a little over a year. So I feel very blessed that my two older children have been gracious to me, and my that father really has been gracious to me and allowed me to regain those relationships with my children, because I know that that does not always happen.
For some parents out there, they're probably hearing your story and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe this has happened. Because a lot of people can't imagine one, doing it, and two, that it actually happens. So you mentioned the journey of how this person started off from the day you got married and they were satisfying themselves and pleasuring themselves all the way up until later on in it where there was inappropriate comments to the children, behaviors to yourself. What were the signs, or were there any signs earlier on, let's say maybe before the marriage, that you look back now and you're like, okay, I missed out on that one?
Yeah, there were signs, but like you said, I missed them. No, I grew up in a conservative Christian home. Um, it's called Old German Baptist Brethren Church. It's similar to Amish and Mennonite. The women wear a little white covering and cape dresses. And um, that's how my former spouse was also raised. And I thought, by all appearances, he was godly. He read his Bible. He talked about reading his Bible. He talked about doing Bible study and praying. And, um, you know, by all appearances, to myself and to others, he treated me really well. But there were a few things that made me uncomfortable, but I couldn't put it into words what it was. nor had I been taught to listen to my intuition and to listen to my, to when something doesn't feel right, to examine why it doesn't feel right and figure that out. Um, and I was also taught that um, once you're married, especially, that you are submissive and he is the head of the home. And I'm to be fully transparent, I probably took that a little far. Um, but that's some of the things that I regret, teaching my children to respect him no matter what, respecting him myself no matter what, until one day I had a light bulb moment and things started to change.
And you shouldn't be necessarily blaming yourself, because how many people, once they get into a marriage, they view it a certain type of way. There's like a structure in their mind.
Mhm.
For those who are religious, they understand that there's the headship, right? There's, then there's God, there's the man, then there's the woman, then there's the children. And I think in general, a lot of people have an idea of what their marriage wants to look like, and then reality hits and it's something totally different,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
But the difference is still a version of, maybe for lack of a better word, the fantasy in their mind, or the reality perhaps they've thought of. But for you, it sounds like it was a complete 180, something so far different. And you come from a unique position because, as you mentioned, you're religious, you have the faith. So in a lot of ways, that's supposed to be your protection, right?
Mhm.
Like how many times, because I grew up in the church as well. Like how many times do we are we taught that the religion is to keep away these things, is to shield us, right? But here you have a man that is treating you in a way that is contradicting what you were told it was supposed to be. Was there a battle for you to maybe try to find a balance between what you're taught and what you're seeing, and if you should continue forward in this type of relationship, knowing that it's not what you're being shown, but yet you still want to be true to what you were taught?
Yes, and that is some of why I stayed for so long. I was married to him for 23 years. The divorce was just final in February of this year. And we left the Old German Baptist many years ago. And I began to study divorce and began to understand that divorce is not wrong and that God doesn't hate divorce. He hates the abuse that leads to divorce. So we have the Old Testament, the first five books of the Bible. Moses gives divorce to the Israelites. And then in some of the prophets, it's talked about divorce. And what he what he truly hates is the abuse that leads to divorce. And then Jesus backs that up with um, you may divorce for these things. Adultery, it doesn't specifically use abuse, but there's that whole list of things that he says does make divorce okay. It is okay to be divorced. And while I began to understand that and to agree with that, and to my beliefs changed to I don't have a problem with divorce and I don't have a problem with people remarrying once they are divorced, it wasn't for me. Like I was okay with it for others, but I it wasn't for me. And that created a problem for me because I was holding on so tight to restoration. I wanted my marriage to be restored, that I couldn't see that there was a way out for me. And it wasn't until I started, well, I'm very transparent. So full transparency here. My former spouse knows this. I told him this. I actually started praying that something would happen. Like there could be a one car accident. He's the only one in the vehicle, one car accident, his life could be over. And I started praying for that to happen. And when that didn't happen, then I changed my prayer to, this is so painful. It hurts so bad. I just want to be out. I just want this to end. I want my pain to end. I want my marriage to end. And clearly, you're not doing what I've prayed for. So there has to be another way. And then soon after, I changed my prayer again to, when can I be released from my marriage? It was like 3 months after I started praying that he gave me 3 witnesses in one day that I was released from my marriage. And there was actually a fourth witness that she wouldn't like being called a witness because she doesn't agree with divorce and remarriage. But what she said to me really made me think, and it completely hit me wrong. And so when I told him I wanted a divorce and that I'd had these 3 witnesses and that I'd talked with this other person, um, it was like a huge relief. It was a huge relief to me to know that this was all going to end, not knowing at the time that it was going to take 2.5 years, but I still, there was somewhat of an end in sight now.
And when you look at the situation where he's trying to groom the children, making sexual comments, being sexually inappropriate with them, with you, and now you're praying for something to happen to him. Now you're looking to escape this marriage. Was there a sense of shame that the day that you do escape this marriage, would someone else want you? Or would friends want to be around you? Or how would life look like after you escape the marriage?
Oh, I love that question. So, I had to, at the point that I finally divorced him or started the divorce proceedings, I had been very intentional about building support systems for my children and I. So we had been separated at one point, and he came back home because I didn't have support systems. I was told that I was hurting the church. I was hurting my children because he wasn't in the home. And so I let him come back home, and he never should have. But I ended up making him move out a second time because he choked our oldest son to the point of blackout. And I said, you have to move out and you have to get counseling. You have to take management classes. Whatever it is, you have to get help. And he never moved back home. Um, so at that point, I had started to intentionally build support systems around myself for myself and my children. And so I knew that I had support in place when I started the divorce proceedings, that there was going to be people that would pray with me, that would speak truth into my life, that if, and this never happened, but if I was like, this is too much, this is too hard, I'm just going to go back, that they would be like, no, no, sister, you're not going back to that. No, I had those kind of people in my life. Um, was I concerned that no one would want me? Yes. Quite frankly, I felt so broken, so damaged. Like, why would anybody want me? I have been through this, these yucky things. Why is anyone ever going to want me? And again, thankfully, I had people in my life that when I said this to them, they were like, are you kidding me, Beth? Like, you're amazing. You're beautiful. Any man would be so blessed to have you as his wife. And I just had to sit back and let those words really truly sink deep into my heart and do the healing work to get to the place that I believed them myself.
And that's the problem with like abuse, right? Especially on the woman's side, because majority of the time, if there's a breakdown of the marriage and the children go with the mother,
Mhm.
right? So if there's an abusive situation and you're fleeing it or you're escaping it, you have the abuse, you have the trauma, you have the children who are impacted by, right? And there's a lot of people out there, they're going to look at you and say, you know, Beth, this is too much for me. I wish you all the best, but it's too much for me. Whereas you're going to have people that's around you that are very close, they're going to cheer you on. Like your friends did, right? Of course, people would want you, Beth. They want to build up your confidence because the last thing that you want to happen is that you start to believe you won't be able to find love ever again. And as you were married for all these years, did you ever think that you would want to be loved again?
Well, it's my experience as I have talked to women who have been sexually betrayed by their husband, whether it's a pornography addiction, whether it or some other form of acting out, visiting prostitutes, whatever it is. Um, we all tend to go through this phase of all men are this way. And I am never going to get remarried. I am never going to, men, I don't want nothing to do with them. And it seems, it's my experience that we all go through this phase. And so when a woman starts saying that to me, I'm like, okay, that's okay. That's where you are right now. But let me just tell you, that's going to change. You're going to heal. You're going to get to the point that, oh, maybe he's kind of cute. Or I like his personality. You're going to get to that point that you're going to realize that all men aren't like this. All men are not going to betray you. And there might actually be someone out there that would love me the way I need and want to be loved.
When you're saying that and when you're speaking to those women, it's one thing to say it and it's one thing to believe it. Which
Mhm.
one do you think was harder, saying it or believing it, or maybe both?
It took a lot of work. Took a lot of healing work for me to get to the point that um, that I could look at a man without thinking, I bet you're just like my former spouse. Or I'm sure you look at pornography, all men do. It took a lot of healing and a lot of in being very intentional because I know there's good men out there. They exist. I know that. I know that now, and I knew that then, and I believe these women also know it, but we're so hurt. We're so broken, if you will, that for a time we can't see that there are good men out there. Even though we know some of them ourselves, we still can't reconcile that this happened to me by a man, but there's still good men out there.
And just for the record, everyone, I do not watch pornography, nor do I have a pornography addiction. So I'm one of those good men out there, just so everyone knows, right? But Beth, you raised a fantastic point because the reliance on pornography, I can see increasing and increasing, especially when you look at how the world is now post pandemic, right? There was, in most places, it was probably at least 2 years were indoors. Interaction was decreased a little bit, right? So, what was the best way for people to interact? It was online. And a lot of people went there. Here in Canada, they were giving away free subscriptions to porn sites during the lockdowns. So it was premium content. So imagine how many people were watching that and their minds were being altered, their life was being altered. And especially that you're home, right? Because the more time you're home, you're doing home things. You're watching probably TV more, you're probably on the computer more. And then you have your partner there. And how many people found out that they really didn't like their partner when they're in close proximities, right? So I could imagine the men and women out there becoming addicted to this because idle hands, right, is a devil's workshop. When you start to piece it together now in reflection, how much of an impact was the addiction to not only your marriage, but to maybe how you viewed marriage at that time?
It impacted our marriage significantly, significantly. Um, because as women, we know we're intuitive. We know when things aren't right. Like I knew when I was dating him, something wasn't right, but I couldn't tell you what it was. I couldn't
Mm.
put it into words. And it was the same way in my marriage. I knew things were off, but I couldn't tell you what it was. I couldn't put it into words. And It wasn't until my daughter said, "Have you ever thought about this?" And I was like, "No, don't know anything about it." And I had to look up what covert incest was. It's
Wow.
essentially an emotional affair with between a child and a parent.
Hmm.
I had never heard of it, had no clue. But as soon as I looked it up, I was like, that's what's been wrong with my marriage. He's
Mm.
going to my child instead of coming to me.
Hmm.
And along with pornography and all the other things, but I began to understand. It gave me words to put to what I knew was put to the feeling that something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was. Did it impact my view of marriage? No, because on both sides of my family, but specifically my mother's side, in my generation, there's two of us who are now divorced. And as far as I know, we are the only two in that family line that's ever been divorced. Because the Old German Baptist Brethren, both of my family lines go back generations in that church. And divorce is not an option. And if it is, you stay single the rest of your life if you want to stay as part of the church. So there I had before me the examples of good marriages that while they weren't perfect because no marriage is, we're all human beings, they still were good marriages. They had been through a lot of heartache and um, a lot of trials, but they that made them stronger instead of tearing them apart. And so I had the example of good marriages all around me. It just wasn't in my own.
What kind of support did you receive from the church? Because I know sometimes the church can be rigid in some ways, especially when it comes to the vows of the marriage, because a lot of people view it as an absolute, meaning that you're married until this happens. So, what kind of support did they provide to you? And were you comfortable still participating in the church, knowing what you're experiencing at home?
Well, so I believe it's been 14 years. Is that right? We left in 2007. It's 2024. I am not good with math. So however long that is, it's been that long since I was a member of the Old German Baptist Brethren. So many, many years um, since I've been a member there. And I did try to talk to other women and was shut down because I was speaking badly about my husband or I was gossiping. And that's not what we do. We submit, we don't share our troubles. You put a smile on your face, you go to church, and you act like, and you say, everything is fine. We're doing fine. We're great. Life's good. No matter what the true feelings are, or no matter, you know, what is going on. We did go to a minister for help after he confessed the second time that he used pornography. And in that conversation with the minister, he told the minister that he had looked at pornography since 12 years old. And he told the minister that he looked at pornography because I wouldn't have sex with him. Well, instead of the minister looking at him and saying, fix your problem, and you'll probably fix her problem, he looked at me and said, you need to give him more sex every single day. I believe you should be having sex every single day and multiple times a day if that's what he wants. So that was not helpful. And then when I separated from him the second time, there were some supportive people in the fellowship that we attended at that time. There were a lot of supportive people there. And I now attend a church where my children and I are well loved. Um, if we don't come, because I drive an hour and 45 minutes to fellowship, if we don't come, I get text, hey, we missed you. Hope everything's okay. And when we do end up going, if we've missed, people come up to us and say, "Hey, we missed you last week. So glad to see you again." We're just very well loved there. So my experience with the Old German Baptist versus where I am now are vastly different. If we had been in this church when all of this went down, things would have been completely different.
That's the part that's a little bit unfortunate for two reasons. One, so many people out there, they just don't get it when it comes to the trauma from their childhood. Like a 12-year-old has no business watching pornography,
Right.
right? So he's established this as his baseline. He probably thinking, well, I've been doing it for how many years? No one probably corrected it. No one mentioned anything. So his baseline is it's fine. Now he enters someone else who is like, no, this is not fine. So you have a conflict because he's like, well, it's been fine for the last how many years, but to other people, this isn't normal behavior. Something is off. Not necessarily like significant, but it can be like any indulgence, right? Indulgence, right? And then now for the second thing is you have the leadership, the shepherd of the flock, not providing a balanced support system. It's like, okay, well, he's doing it because this person is doing it because of X. You have to give them more of Y to counter it. Well, it's like, no, there's a root issue here. Like, why is this person not being able to be satisfied in conventional ways with their partner? That is a fundamental issue. And I wish sometimes people would do a better job of saying that, okay, I'm going to put myself in your shoes and say, is what you're doing in alignment with what we teach? I think that is probably the most objective approach. And if they were to do that, they would say that, you know what, you watching pornography doesn't cut it. We need to get you help. You may still end up in divorce, but at least it's not putting it solely on the person who's being negatively impacted. It's on the person who's doing the action. Now that you have more support and it's a better system and it's working for you, how happy are you that you've come out of it the woman that you are?
Oh, super happy. Like I still marvel. There's days, um, yesterday was one of those days that I still marvel that at the joy that I feel at just being alive and seeing the colors around me for fall and feeling the crisp air and being able to actually enjoy it. Um, am I the same person that I was at 20 years old? Deep inside, yeah, in a lot of ways I still am. But in a lot of ways, I am not that person. I look back at my life and I think that was me. That's my life. Wow. Because my life is so different now in really, really good ways.
When you reflect from the woman that you are you surprised that you got caught up in a situation like that?
No,
Why?
because of so there's some different factors. One factor is my former spouse is very charismatic, very charming, and um I had people when we were dating, I talked with my dad, and my dad said, "Beth, he treats you really well. Don't let him get away." I talked with some girlfriends, and one of them was like, "Beth, he treats you like a queen. Like, I wish I had someone to treat me that way." Um, and then when we separated the second time, I was told, "Well, but he does all the sound at fellowship and he dances in fellowship and he does all of this and all of that." And I'm like, well, yeah, that's at fellowship, that's out in public, but you're not behind my closed doors at home to see what's going on. and what has been going on for the last 19 years. So he very much charms people and um, dupes them. It's He's not, as far as I know, he's not been officially diagnosed as narcissistic, but we fellowshipped with a counselor, and she told me one time, she said, Beth, he's a narcissist. And I was like, really? She goes, oh yeah, yeah, he's a narcissist. And then one of my therapists pulled out her DSM and she went through the narcissist list. And I was like, yeah, every single one of those. That's that's who he is. He was diagnosed with bipolar, but he was never, that I know of, formally diagnosed with narcissism. So when I started to understand what narcissism is and how it functions and how people, the facade that's there, I was like, well, yeah, no wonder I was taken in. No wonder everyone around me was taken in, and everybody thought he treated me so well because that's what he wanted us to believe. But we all know that sooner or later, the facade cracks and falls apart. The mask comes off, and it did, obviously.
That's exactly what I call it. I was like, the mask will always eventually fall off. And I speak to so many women who are abused, and this probably goes for men as well, is that the abuser, very charming, very charismatic, especially in public, because that's the mask that they design, right? And then when they take it off, is it's with home because they can only allow their victim to see that side of them. And there's always that saying that there's there's a victim born every minute for an abuser, because the abuser will find someone because they're really good at finding who to abuse, right? And they'll beat them down, they'll abuse them. And then when they're finished with them or that person leaves, there's always someone else that they can find, and they leave this trail of chaos. And the reason why I asked you that question initially is because I speak to so many people who are abused, and they say the same thing. They're like, they're not surprised that they got caught up in that situation.
Mhm.
They see in themselves why someone would pick them to abuse. When you hear yourself say that, Beth, how does that make you feel, knowing that you're a target because of who you are for these potential abusers?
It makes me determined that it never happens again, that I learn from this, and I am extra careful that it never happens again. Um, and it also makes me want to educate women, want to um, want to let women know that if they're in this situation, they're not alone. There are others of us out here, way too many of us, unfortunately, out here who are or have been in these situations, and they're not alone.
What steps do you think women should take to prevent themselves from falling into this situation, or at the very least, I guess, not getting into it altogether or avoiding it?
That's a really great question too. Um, so I actually I've done this twice. I have dated one man, and another man I was talking to. We were going to potentially pursue a relationship, and I actually am teaching women to do this and teenagers as well. Um, and I preface it with the story that I have done this myself. I'm not asking anyone else to do something that I've never done. So um, I sat down with these two men, obviously at separate times. I wasn't dating them at the same time, but obviously at separate times. And I ask really hard personal questions. I ask point blank, do you look at pornography? How long have you looked at pornography? And it's very telling. You watch body language, you watch um, their face, you listen to their words, but you also listen to their voice inflections. Does their voice get higher? Does it get lower? So you're paying attention to all of it when they answer. Um, and is it uncomfortable? Absolutely. It is uncomfortable because some of the times you don't even know these people very well, but you want to know this information before you go into any kind of a relationship with them. So ask the hard questions. Don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. And if you're a teenager, ask the questions, or parents, ask the questions for your children, because I have an 11-year-old daughter. You think I'm going to let her go out with somebody before mama sits down and has a talk with him? Absolutely not. He
I
is
don't
going to be,
think.
oh,
No, I was
go
gonna
ahead.
say you're. I agree with you. I don't think we ask enough questions.
Mhm.
I'm surprised how little, or sorry, how few questions we actually ask when it comes to the early stages. So by all means, ask that question. I have two friends. If I There's two people I know since you mentioned the pornography question that I wanted to share because you mentioned it and I love it. There's a friend, he says he watches pornography very few times a year, maybe twice, three times. And then there's another person who I knew every day. And if I gauge just a conversation about relationship or sexuality in a relationship, it's vastly different. Whereas a person who watched pornography a few times a year, they still have a very healthy relationship. Very like, you know what, you get together. It's not the most important thing, sex. It's good when you have it, so on and so forth. This other person, oh, I can't wait to do it this way, that way, this way. They're describing essentially what's in the X-rated movie. And I wonder how many people are walking around, literally, Beth, and when they see us, they're putting us into the movie situation, right? Do you think it could be literally that scary for those who are dating? When Because you mentioned the question, so do you think it could be that scary where you have people where it's on their mind 24/7?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I've actually been in uncomfortable situations where I felt like I could tell that that's what the man was thinking by the way he was looking at me. That it was like, and he was married. His wife was one of my very good friends. And I told her, I said, I feel like your husband just undressed me. It was so gross. So, yeah, definitely that happens.
That I couldn't imagine that because for you, that probably did that take you back to your marriage and what you were experiencing when you saw this man who's married looking at you with such, I'm guessing, lust or whatever, however he was looking at you, he's looking at you in this way and you're like, oh my god, this is probably how my ex-husband was walking around town looking at people.
Right. At the same time, he's telling me he wishes that the college girls, because we live in a college town, that they would cover up, that they would get dressed. So, so it's that whole flipping of the script. He's saying what he knows I want to hear while he's doing what he knows I would be livid about, right?
I
Yeah.
think people forget how impactful that can be. There's a group of guys and they used to date women their age. They're probably almost 40 now, or mid 40s, I should say. They used to date women their age, a couple of years younger, a couple of years older, but around relatively their age, right? And then they started watching certain interviews online, and then they started to get this, started to be more in conversation about younger women, younger women, younger women. And I don't know how active you are on social media, stuff like that, but you probably hear that a lot, right? Like a lot of people tell men, get someone in their 20s and things like that. These This group of men, they're at the point where now it's women who are 20, 21, who are just a few years over the age of majority here in Canada. Someone asked the question, if you were to see someone that is 16, 17, that's a year or two from being a legal age, would you stop or would you just move or would you pursue it? And some guys they said that they would wait. And there's a saying in football where you would redshirt something. And by redshirt mean that someone has a red shirt and when they're ready to play, then they can play the game. And that's what they would do with, so that's what some people would be do with a lot of women. They would be their friends when they're 17 and then get to know them. And then when they're 18, 19, they would pursue it because now it's legal. There was someone here in Canada because he has a tendency, and as you mentioned with your ex-husband, right, saying inappropriate things to the children. His thing was like 15, 16-year-old. And instead of seeking help and trying to recover from it, he moved to a place where it was legal. So now he has all the 15 and 16-year-olds he wants. And I think sometimes people forget how impactful certain things that you see can have on you because we dismiss it. But over time, it's like if I encroach on your property, right, Beth? I go 1 inch, then 2 inches, then
Mhm.
5 inches. And then in a couple of days, I've moved in. Right? I don't think people realize how much of an impact it has. So for you, was it something that was, or do you think it's something that's gradual? Or do you think sometimes a person is full fledged into it in your experiences with not only yourself, but the women that you are looking to help as well?
And you're talking about like the pornography addiction. Yep. Okay. So our world is so sexualized. Hollywood, music, it's all so sexualized. So there's a lot of soft porn, quote unquote, around us all the time, right? You go to town in the summer, especially, there's women there in their really short shorts and their bikinis. They're not dressed. It's soft pornography, if you will. Most people, that's what they start with, and then they work up. And the reason that we end up with men like that, like the man there in Canada that is now moved somewhere where he has access to 14 and 15, 16-year-olds, is because they get to a point where what they're watching doesn't stimulate them anymore. So they need something that's a little bit worse and a little bit worse. And so it just keeps degrading until it's children. It's just like a drug addiction. They might start with marijuana, but soon they aren't getting the high that they want from that, and so they move on to what cocaine, heroin, meth, whatever it is, but they aren't getting the high that they want, so they just keep going till they can get that high that they want. It's the same idea with pornography. The brain starts to seek that dopamine, and it's got to have that dopamine, and it's got to have worse and worse in order to get the same hit of dopamine.
So you're saying it's like they've gone through it, and now, to your point, they're not getting the same dopamine effect. So now they got
Right.
to move on to something else. Then they move on to something else. And by the time they reach level 4 or 5 of this, they're full fledged into it. They're so deep into it, they're fully addicts. And you made a good point. The clothing, I think, for a lot of people has changed significantly because you're bombarded with sexual innuendos
Mhm.
every day of your life. Like if you were to step outside your house, in a lot of ways, it's in your face,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. Thank you, 1960s. We love.
I know, right? Freedom. We're free to do whatever it is we want. So as we close, Beth, what advice do you want to give for our audience today who maybe have found themselves in this situation and they're looking to escape it and get out of it?
Yeah. Well, um, if if your husband is not abusive and it's just a sexual addiction, just um, there are support groups that you can go to. Find women who have been there where you are and can speak into your life, give you encouragement, support you, be there for you. Um, learn to practice self-care. And I'm not talking going and getting your nails done or eating chocolate and taking bubble baths. I'm talking true self-care, that because self-care is healing, and you heal as you do self-care. So it works both ways. That might sound like I just said the same thing, and maybe I did, but I meant something different. So as you find yourself in this situation, self-care is going to be vitally important because it is very easy to get caught in spirals of fighting, spirals of talking to yourself negatively, because often a sexual addict will tell their wife that this is your fault. Um, just about every woman that I talk to, that's what they've been told. It's their fault. There's something wrong with them. So we take that in as there's something wrong with me. So self-care helps you to should help you to recognize that there's not anything wrong with you. This is his own problem. These are the choices that he's making. I don't care if his wife is in a wheelchair and she cannot be physically intimate with him, can't have sex. He still can make the choice to be faithful to her. It's completely his choice. So recognize that that's his choice. Um, and the really big thing is that you're not alone. Again, there's so many of us out here, but there's so much shame surrounding being married to a sex addict that a lot of us don't talk about it. We stay silent and people don't know what's going on. So um, find safe people to talk to, find safe people to share that are going to support you, that are going to speak truth into you, that are going to pray with you, point you back to the scriptures, and they're not going to allow you to talk negatively about yourself. They're not going to allow you to spiral. They're have the kind of people in your life that are going to show up at your door if you don't answer their text messages for 2 days. They're going to show up at your door and say, hey, I've been texting you for 2 days. You haven't responded. I've tried calling you. I'm now here to check on you and see what's going on. Oh, you've been in bed for 2 days. Okay, let's get up. Go take a shower. I'm going to fix you something to eat, and then we're going to sit together. Have those kind of people in your life.